What's up, guys? Mike B, aka Phony, and right now we're going to be taking a look at the top 5 video game soundtracks of 2012 as chosen by yours truly. That's right, me. If you're not me, then I'm sorry, your vote doesn't count. Now, a lot of you guys have watched me stream music creation. I'll sit there and I'll work on a song and I'll stream it and I'll kind of just talk my way through it, and I'll tell you guys what it is that I'm envisioning, like what I see when I'm writing the notes, so that a lot of you guys remember the Guild Wars 2 remix that I did, where I was discussing how I feel like this is the point where you're in the down state and your friends are coming to help you and blah, blah, blah. Like all that stuff. If you tuned in for it, you guys know what I'm talking about. Music for me is definitely a multi-layered experience. When I hear a song, it generates a color, it generates a picture or an action sequence. And when you take soundtracks, like these music pieces, and you pair them up with games, if the game doesn't quite fit the music, so that what ends up happening is you're absorbing the music, and what you're envisioning in your head is not quite gelling with what you're seeing, that could be a pretty major conflict. And unfortunately, it could actually ruin the entire gaming experience. So it's obviously a big deal to have music that doesn't suck paired up with a game that hopefully doesn't suck either. And so today I have 5 of them for you, and starting off with number 5. Crater. First, it's a co-op squad-based real-time strategy game based in the post-apocalyptic and kind of environment, very steampunk. And up front, some of the soundtrack pieces almost sound like they wouldn't fit, but because of the environments that they created in the game, right? Like the bar, the pub, some of the overworld, right? The overworld map. Because of these environments they created, they were able to pair up some of these pieces very fluidly. There are a couple of artists that are contributing to this soundtrack. We have Parabolic Hyperflies, Jonas Hellberg, and Christian Gable. Christian Gable is probably my favorite contributor to this soundtrack. And I think the reason why is because his work reminds me of Jack Wall's contribution with Mass Effect 2, right? With the Mass Effect soundtracks, which unfortunately Jack Wall is not part of the Mass Effect 3 soundtrack. There's a noticeable difference in style when you listen to Mass Effect 2 versus Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 2 is this light years beyond the ME3 soundtrack, and this guy could have composed Mass Effect 2 Part 2 if he wanted to, because that's what his sound is, and I love it. It gives off this very Nord era Vangelis vibe. Vangelis is a electronic composer, right? A Nord is a specific type of a brand of keyboard that had a very distinct flavor to it. And people use them for almost the same thing. Like everybody was writing new age music with Nord sounds, right? You can mesh it with other things, but it was definitely really popular in the new age scene. And new age isn't my thing, mind you, but when you pair it in a game where you have this very ominous type feeling that's always around, as you're exploring this post-apoc world, some of these pieces really work. And then you go into a bar and you hear bar music. It just it pulls you away. See, think about it. In real life, when you go to a bar, you're typically trying to get away from your daily norm, whatever it is. You leave your office or you leave your home and you go to a bar to drink and listen to loud music, right? That's why you go to a bar, and they've got that nailed. And that song that you hear in the pub, in the game, it's on the soundtrack. And so as you're listening to the soundtrack, you go through all of those places that they've created, and it totally fits. Now, besides all the works that Christian Gable composed, which is all the ones that are actually not named, it just says, the name of the track and of course creator soundtrack. But the other ones are actually labeled with the names of the contributors. For example, one of them, my favorite ones on that's not Christian Gable, is Akegikmo. It's Acegikmo by Parabolic Hyperflies. This is a really great track. But I mean, outside of this, we have a wide range of pieces from indie rock to garage punk to chiptune, and then of course all the stuff composed by Christian, which is this very Mass Effect 2 Jack Wall flavored kind of new age just soundtrack. It just sounds so good and just so peaceful and also very ominous at the same time. And all of this is why Crater very easily sits at number 5 on my list. Number 4 is Dust Force. If you've not heard this soundtrack or played this game, let me give you a brief overview. The game itself is a platformer. It's a speed run platformer where you're essentially a crew of janitors, and you just haul ass through these levels, dusting, cleaning up leaves, cleaning up dust, cleaning up whatever, and then you just make it to the end in the fastest possible time. There's leaderboards, all this stuff is set up. I did Indie for Breakfast on it. I should have focused a bit more on the leaderboard section of it because it's a very, very big community, but you could definitely get a good taste of it by checking out my Indie for Breakfast coverage on it. Now, the game itself may sound kind of weird. It's like, wait, so it's a game, janitors, and I'm cleaning? That sounds dumb. It's not. It's a really, really fun, fast-paced, very, very difficult platformer, and the soundtrack completely fits. What makes it work so well is that it doesn't detract from what's going on in the game. It's not overly action-y. It's not extremely brooding. It's just enough to kind of keep you going. What's funny, here's what's really funny about this. You could listen to the soundtrack while you actually clean the house. So, like, take this and blast it. It's just happy. It's just there. You listen to it and you're just like, yeah, you're just kind of into it. It's a working soundtrack. It makes you feel like you could get stuff done. The tracks that are on here have a pretty good range. There's a lot of them that you can almost separate it into like a couple different piles that all kind of fit really well together. All of them actually fit well together, but you could separate it just enough. Like, for example, you look at Cider Time, 9-Bit Expedition, Elvish Piper Academy. They all sound like they could be part of a single EP. But then you listen to Pillars of Pepper. Pillars of Pepper has this really, really great kind of down-tempo, big beat style where the beat is just like breathing almost. You hear synths that are coming in and out, but they're being pushed around by this huge, huge beat. But it's not aggressive, and that's what I really love about like this particular song, Pillars of Pepper, is that you hear all of these sounds that are occupying the same space. They're all very big sounds, these big synth sounds that are heavily affected. Then you have these very, very big beats with the snares that are alternating from like a nice snappy snare to a really huge reverberated snare. But nothing is abrasive. Nothing is really kind of hitting you and it's sounding like it's out of place. It almost sounds like watching a combustion engine work at like 1/1000th of the speed. You know that combustion is taking place and there's violent reactions going on here, but because you're watching it at such a slow pace, you don't feel that anymore, but it just becomes pleasant. So overall, the Dust Force soundtrack, the artist, Lifeform, the album's actually called Fastfall, is definitely worth a buy. It's 18 tracks, all work so well together, and honestly, it makes cleaning so much easier to tolerate. Next up at number 3, we have Little Inferno. This soundtrack was composed by Kyle Gabler of the Tomorrow Corporation, and he actually did the World of Goo soundtrack back in 2008. I did an Indie for Breakfast for World of Goo, and I think I preached a little too much about the soundtrack itself. It's very interesting. He could actually do soundtracks easily for Tim Burton movies. He captures that very world of strange wonder type ominous feeling that you get from watching like a Tim Burton movie. Think Edward Scissorhands, right? Like you have this kind of pseudo surreal type reality, and that's the kind of music this guy writes. You're listening to it, and it's not like very much that you've heard before. The way that he writes, the way that he presents things, and of course, the Tomorrow Corporation, of course, the games like World of Goo and of course Little Inferno, they're not like average games. So the soundtrack works beautifully with the game in both World of Goo and Little Inferno. The best part is that it's free. He creates these soundtracks, these fantastic pieces, and then he releases them on the website for free. And the link's below, you go and check it out yourself. But I highly recommend you play the game so you can really get the full experience. So Little Inferno is a game that revolves around a toy furnace, a boy, a young lady pen pal who shares his love for the toy, and of course the Tomorrow Corporation. For a game with such a simple premise, and very simple kind of plots, very little going on for 90% of the game, it certainly delivers a huge punch to the face with the message. It's so much emotion and wonder are captured in this one soundtrack. And here's a really great example of getting like the full visceral reaction from just hearing something, right? Because you're basically you're pulling on memories that you've associated with sounds, right? So you're actually getting kind of a visual aspect associated by hearing even like a handful of notes. Really good example. Listen to these notes right here. Now, if you've seen Up, you know when this music plays, right? You know exactly what part of the movie this music plays. And if you have a heart, you probably just had a reaction to those few notes. I get the same feeling when listening, obviously, to the Up soundtrack and also to this soundtrack. When there's so much, there's so many memories locked away in each piece, in every song that's on this soundtrack. It's almost like you're reliving those years that you spent ordering all of those shiny things that you're simply gonna toss into the flames. But honestly, if there was a way for me to have two runner-ups to the number one, I would definitely put this right next to number two. It was such a close call. It was difficult for me to part with this because there were parts of like the Let's Play that I did, and you can check the links of that right here on the screen. There was parts of the Let's Play that I did that were so jarring that I had to I had to almost mask my reaction with laughter, which is how I react to a lot of things. It was definitely an experience, the game itself, and I don't want to give anything away, but I highly recommend that you go and play it. It doesn't take that long to beat. It's extremely cheap. It's like $15 or something. I highly recommend going and giving it a shot. The vast majority of you should have a reaction to this game, not just the individual segments of it, but just the entire message as a whole. It's a really, really fantastic game. And of course, the soundtrack is just so good. It goes perfect with the game. It's really, to me, it's one single piece of art, and I highly suggest for all of you guys who haven't played it to go mow a couple lawns and buy this game and just start burning stuff. You will thank me later. Coming in at number 2 is Disaster Piece's Fez soundtrack. This first off, the game. Fez is a game where a 2D man comes across a red Fez hat that allows him to see the world in 3 dimensions. Yet the interaction with the world is still in 2D format. If you haven't played Fez, then you're unfortunately missing out on a mind-blowing experience that nobody has ever seen in a game before. I did a couple of Let's Plays. It was actually one night of streaming, and I was so blown away by how this game approached just a basic, 8 or 16-bit platformer, just a very retro throwback style visually. And then of course, whenever you have this crazy experience with a game visually and gameplay wise, you have to have a soundtrack that could be equally as creative to match, right? So thankfully, Disaster Piece completely delivered on this end. I have about 5 of his albums already, and they venture from chiptune to like electro weird, to whatever you wish to classify the soundtrack for Fez as. Adventure, just to highlight a couple songs, Adventure is the first song on the album. It was actually played by the London Philharmonic for the one of the video game soundtrack compilations that they did. And it is a really fantastic, like, minimalistic piece. It really is good. I've actually said this before. The Fez soundtrack is, to me, Aphex Twin Selected Ambient Works 2 of modern day. Like, Saw 2 is an amazing album. I still listen to it very, very often. But the Fez soundtrack has definitely stepped up to that level for me, where I can listen to it almost side by side with Saw 2. It's just that good, and I would definitely say that the Fez soundtrack is the Saw 2 of the electro weird slash chiptune genre, which pretty much makes it a must-have in my opinion. Like, everybody should own Saw 2. Well, now you should go out and get the Fez soundtrack. Other songs like Legend have this beautifully broken feel with these huge pad synths that are playing throughout the majority of the song. They're almost falling apart as they're being delivered to your ear. And if you play the game, you know that the world is falling apart, and it's up to you, your main character, to go through and basically repair it. Right from the get-go, within the first like 5 minutes of gameplay, the entire game reboots itself. It's all simulated, of course, but if you're not expecting it, it's definitely one of many, many mind-blowing sections of that game that you're going to come across as you play it. So the Fez soundtrack definitely belongs here. Disaster Piece is an extraordinarily talented composer. I would highly recommend checking out, if I could just name one. He has an EP, or actually an album, that has about 9 tracks on it. It's called Level, and it's just so good. Every track is actually just named 1, 2, 3, 4, so level 4, level 5, you see how that goes? I highly recommend going and checking that out as a good starting point, and then kind of branch off from there and check out some of his other works. He's extremely talented. Fez is an extremely just great game. I can't wait for it to come out on PC so that more people can go and experience it. But definitely go pick up this album. Even if you don't own the game, you could still listen to this album and get the full experience from it. And just as a side story, I guess, associated with the Fez soundtrack, I posted a picture probably beginning of this year where I'm basically sitting in like a bubble bath with a glass of wine. It sounds a lot sexier than it actually is, trust me. But when it was basically our honeymoon for my wife and I, we went to Indianapolis. We did a couple like mini honeymoons. We went to Disneyland, then we went to the Indy 500. And basically it was just a lot of relaxed time. And while we were out there in Indianapolis, we were staying at this kind of bed and breakfast place. And they had this gigantic bathtub with the jets and all that crap, right? So we filled it up with like a bubble bath and we poured wine. And I basically set up my phone with some speakers in the corner, and I just let the Fez soundtrack play. And the Fez soundtrack just really kind of added, without being intrusive, to that specific scenario that we created, which was basically a nice, relaxed, just kind of chill type atmosphere. The Fez soundtrack really complemented that quite well. Even my wife, who doesn't listen to video game music at all, she doesn't listen to chip music, she doesn't listen to any of that stuff. She's a very acoustic type person, like Dave Matthews Band and all that. But she absolutely loved it, and again, she also agreed that it definitely complemented the environment, the experience that we were having, which was basically, you know, chill in a bathtub full of bubbly and drink some, I guess, bubbly. Now, before we get to number 1, let's take a break and go to the honorable mention of the entire top 5. This is going to be sitting right between number 2 and number 1 because it's definitely one of my favorite albums, not associated with the video game that came out this year. It's called Effects 4, and it's made by Jake Kaufman, aka Virt, V-I-R-T. This album is the most metal chiptune album you've ever heard in your life. It is so metal. Like, I have found myself, and I do this, right? I will listen to this, blasting it, going down like the head to Fry's or something, because that's the only reason why I ever leave the house. And I don't care. It's just so damn good. I would use as an example, think Jimi Hendrix, think Slash, right? When you hear really talented guitarists kind of just go through a break and they just really feel what they're laying down for a solo, that's what this album is. It is that kind of delivery. Like when you listen to it, you could feel the soul and feel what's happening. There's an action sequence to his music. You'll go from like super Contra, right, or Contra, to like these kind of very whimsical type, like Chrysalis or something. You get these environments that he's creating. And here's what's awesome is if you go to his Bandcamp page, he actually has a story breakdown for the entire album. And it even kicks off with the track called the HBO feature presentation. And if you guys ever remember that particular tune, it was very catchy and it's very recognizable. I actually don't know if they still use it, but he kicks it off with that, which definitely helps set the stage for the fact that you're going to be basically for the next, what is it, probably 50 minutes, you're going to be experiencing what is basically a story that Virt is telling using the music. And it's so good. Every track has its own flavor. You're getting like, you know, double bass in there, you get these crazy leads, you get these great breakdowns. And the thing that floored me the most about it is that he didn't write this in like Reason or in any other program on the computer. He actually wrote it in a program that ran and processed all the sound through a Nintendo, like an actual NES. So he's not cheating in a sense. Whenever you listen to, because of the restricted number of channels that are available for tone generation on the NES sound chip, you can only play a certain number of sounds at any given time, which means you get no overlap. So when you listen to, like, let's say the Fez soundtrack, for example, you get all these extra layers that would not be possible using a Nintendo chip because it's too many layers for it to handle. So when you're listening to Vert's FX4, you're actually listening to what could have been a soundtrack to a video game that you're playing. And that right there is so crazy once you wrap your head around it. Like, this guy is writing quality tracks that could have been on some of your favorite games from like the 80s and early 90s. And that's why it definitely deserves an honorable mention on this. If it was associated with a game, it would definitely be up here, probably sitting at #1, but #1 this year absolutely has to be the Zombie soundtrack. This thing came out of nowhere. Like, it was attached to a game that, like, this fun little pointless game where you're in an office and everybody around you starts turning to zombies. Your boss, your friends, everybody's now zombies, and it's up to you to, 1, kill all of your friends and coworkers, and 2, destroy everything on that floor and then move on to the next level. Like, the game was so not complex, but the soundtrack was just so good and so damn catchy. It was almost as if the game was written to promote the soundtrack itself. The game is still fun. It's a good smash and grab, but the problem is that the soundtrack is just so much better than the game itself. And it's something that you can listen to anywhere. It's not, like, if I listen to, like, Vert in the truck as I'm driving down the street with the windows down, I might get some weird looks, and at which point I might want to tell them, like, hey, it's not about the sounds that you hear, it's about the music that's being played. And, like, I feel like I need to explain that to people, right? This is something that is very easily accessible to people who don't play video games at all. You could just pop this into any CD player, iPod, or whatever, and you could just, I just named like 2 things that are outdated. Yeah, you could put this on anything you wanted and just blast it, and it doesn't matter, right? It's so good, it's so catchy, and there's 30-something tracks on this thing. And they range, right? You get a little bit of breaks, you get a little bit of like French house, you get all of this, like these different elements. You hear a little bit of Justice, you hear a little bit of Daft Punk. It's just this great techno, electro, French house mix that really works. And as you guys have seen in some of the videos I've done recently, where I've just thrown it in almost arbitrarily, it makes everything better. For me, it is the Guile theme. You can pick tracks from this and be set in whatever video you want. Just pick up this album and watch something on the internet. Pick something. Go through. You will find a piece on this soundtrack that will complement it perfectly. We all know the track Modern. I used it on the Hawken video where he's stomping around and dancing and stuff while I'm doing things, right? Then there's tracks like Scent, which is this really great kind of piano ambient piece. There's so many different there's so much range in this, yet it all really works well together. And the fact that there are so many pieces to choose from, and very few of them are skippable tracks. Like, if you're listening to a soundtrack, right? Sometimes you're gonna come across maybe like an 8-song soundtrack. You're gonna skip probably like 3 of them because they're really not your thing. But even though this soundtrack ventures into electro territory and also visiting like big beat territory, all within like a couple of tracks of each other, it all really flows well. Like, if you can sit there and just listen to it, and the next thing you know, you're gonna be back at the beginning listening to like Modern or the Zombies theme, the main menu mix, and you're gonna be like, wait, what just happened to the past like 1.5 hours? Because that's how long this soundtrack is. It's 1.5 hours of just amazing, and that's why the Zombie soundtrack is definitely the #1 video game soundtrack for 2012, according to me. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more. I have a couple more top 5s I want to try to bang out over the next couple weeks. Thank you for supporting me all of 2012, and we'll see you guys later.